Hi, I'm Farak Masood. I went to the Cavan School of Mines. I represent Oberon Solutions Australia. At Oberon, we offer a full 360-degree, sector-specific answer to all your contractor management, recruitment, HR, payroll, governance and legislative issues. Let Oberon Solutions Australia take the pain away so you can focus on the projects that will move your business forward. Search Oberon Solutions Australia.
Thank you for joining us for this digital transformation discussion. The topic today is, are mining companies equipped to create value from digitalisation? I'm pleased to be joined today by a panel of industry leaders. Please welcome Mark O'Brien, General Manager, Digital Technology and Innovation at CITIC Pacific Mining. CITIC Pacific Mining is the world's largest magnetite iron ore operation and China's largest resource sector investment outside of China. Mark's responsibilities cover strategic engagement with the business, leadership of technology solutions delivery, and ownership of the key application and infrastructure platforms at CPM across both IT and OT. He has an involvement in mining technology that stretches over 30 years. He is the chair of the GMG AI in Mining Working Group. Dr. Jacqui Coombes, CEO at Amira Global. Jacqui is a minerals industry thought leader with experience across the mine value chain and commodities across the globe. She is skilled in building collaboration across industry, government and academia, developing capacity of businesses and people, and integrating ideas into systems to add value, improve efficiency and productivity. Jacqui is also a member of IMARC's advisory board. IMARC's program is developed in conjunction with the members of the advisory board, considered to be experts in their field. Nick Gresshoff, Head of Mining Australia at ABB. Leading the Process Industries Division, Nick's team is dedicated to applying ABB's integrated automation, electrification and digital solutions to enhance performance across the mining and minerals, metals and aluminium segments. Nick has a wealth of industry experience, utilising the latest automation and mechanical technologies, along with a proven track record of improving business performance across global markets, including Europe, Africa, East Asia, China, Japan and Australia. Welcome to our panel. Today we are discussing whether mining companies are equipped to create value from digitalisation. The challenges faced by miners are well known to us. Deeper mines, more complex ore bodies, rising energy costs, social and geopolitical risk, and the mining workforce. The mining industry has a history of long lead times when developing new technologies, which may lead us to assume that the sector is not increasing productivity and performance through digitalisation. However, the pace is picking up. Accelerations in data, computational power, and connectivity, analytics and intelligence, mobile solutions, and automation and robotics are leading to step changes in lots of sectors. The question is, are mining companies making the most of this? So I'd like to turn to our panel. Mark, if I could start with you. So taken together, these technologies, data, analytics, mobile solutions, robotics, enable a fundamental shift in the way mining works. My first question has two parts. How would you describe the current state of play with regards to these technologies? And how can miners keep pace with the investment required to optimise digitalisation?
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, look, I think your comments earlier were on the money that it has been accelerating. I think from a pretty slow start, I think we've seen a steady build in the way that companies are using data. They've been collecting data for a long time, tended to be sort of pulled up in little silos, but now with a lot of the tools available, we're starting to see better use of the data in being able to do some really smart analytics. Mobile solutions, everyone's got a phone in their pocket or a tablet nearby, so we're starting to see a lot more of that. Robotics, obviously, there's a lot more investment required in robotics, and there are also safety issues, but I see that growing quickly as well with the use of drones and in a lot of these sorts of pieces of equipment. And I think there's a handful of reasons for that. One is I think there's a lot less infrastructure required to actually run some of these types of solutions now. So that's, you know, as you alluded to earlier, there's been a rise in computing power. There's cloud. You know, you can subscribe to some cloud services to do some quite funky things. Whereas in the old days, you'd have to buy a lot of hardware yourself and really set yourself up to do things. But now a lot of that can be accessed quite quickly and easily. There's a lot of subscription-based services. So, you know, you're not looking at big capital outlays to do some interesting experiments and give things a go. And so again, I think that's been another big plus. And in the area of AI, and there's a lot of free tools. So, you know, frankly, you don't need to spend very much at all, if anything, to actually have a dabble with some of your data and see what you can see and what you might be able to do with it. So I think there's definitely been, you know, a lot more action happening because it's cheaper to play, basically, than it ever has been. I think we have a more educated workforce coming through. People have been exposed to, at a consumer level, they get to experience a lot of cool technology every single day on their phones and other environments just at home. And I think those people now are coming through in the mining space, whereas previously there might be people who were a bit sort of anti-change. They were maybe a bit stuck in doing old school things. There's a lot more openness now to, I think, trying out new ideas, just simply because a lot of these users have been exposed to that kind of stuff on a regular basis in their everyday lives. And I think that's a big plus. And I think my final point around what I, you know, just the speed at which I think this has been happening and some positives is that whereas in the past, I think a lot of these ideas were interesting, cool ideas, and it wasn't too sure what they actually meant for companies. And mining companies essentially, I think, are pretty pragmatic environments. They're all about outcomes. There's not a lot of, there doesn't tend to be a lot of waste if you can possibly help it. So really it does come down to getting solid outcomes. And I think that's where people have been seeing some really solid outcomes out of just experimenting with some of their data, seeing some decision support type outcomes perhaps, or other ways in which they're getting some real value. And then of course that encourages people to spend more and sort of invest more time and effort into the whole space. So I think there has been a real acceleration and there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think some real positivity on that front. In terms of your second question, you know, how can miners keep pace with the investment? Well, as I said, I think it's actually cheaper to play than it ever has been. So the real investment comes down to people, investing people and time and energy really into playing in this space and having a mindset, an innovation mindset that you're going to actually try things out and see what you can do. And again, I think that's something that's definitely on the improve, even in small companies. They're seeing the ways in which they can leverage technology to labor costs with efficiencies, automation, consistency around what they're doing. And so, you know, you don't need to sort of take out millions and millions of dollars of CapEx to go play. I think the investment is really just about having the mindset and in being prepared to spend a little bit of time and energy experimenting.
Fantastic. Any of the panel, Nick or Jacqui, do you want to add to that at all?
Jacqui, do you want me to go first, or? All right. So I think there's some real good points there. I think with digital technology, it is becoming cheaper to implement, as per what Mark has said, and we do see that there are more companies that are you know, trialing it out on a smaller scale, or maybe migrating it to a bigger scale in some of their mining installations or operations. I think, you know, when we look at it, we also talked about robotics. I think robotics has been around for quite a while, and I think ABB plays quite a big play in robotics in a lot of industries. And when we look at it, it's not a traditional place where we think about robots, but in reality, there are a lot of actually applications for things like robots. For example, haul truck fueling, as an example. Why do we have to do it manually? Why can we not do it with robots, right? And at the end of the day, this is part of that digital evolution and the journey or the Industry 4.0 journey, actually. That's what it's about. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Jacqui, as we move through the questions, I was going to ask you about an event that you have recently. It's called the Global Roar, and it focused on remote operations, robotics and automation. Could you tell us a little bit about that, but also focusing on how those technologies are helping SMEs? Mark and Nick have mentioned those technologies, and they are available to SMEs and they can capitalize it, but how can they actually do it? What are the opportunities for them? Jacqui, sorry, we're having trouble hearing you. Are you on mute?
Hear me now? So the Global Roar, which was Remote Operations, Automation, and Robotics, a 24-hour event where we had 72 presentations around the globe, one after the other. And this was an opportunity for me to demonstrate how they were exploring those topics. And what was very, very evident was the speed that Mark's talking about, that ability to really explore, test, and do that speedily. And I think the other thing we're seeing there is a change in mindset and collaboration. And the younger generation coming through are quite clearly very comfortable. What struck me, however, was some of the challenges, and it would be remiss of us as thought leaders to not comment on and address some of the challenges. One of which is the significant growth in data, whether our bandwidth, highway, digital infrastructure can actually adapt and deliver. And the second and often misplaced is cybersecurity. The risks we face with this openness is also some of the operational vulnerability through the cybersecurity, and this can be through the national terrorism type cybersecurity, but also in terms of that business and crime around cybersecurity. And I think that then links us to the human interfacing and the capability development. So the people we're bringing on to test and explore and facilitate need to understand the greater context at play. So those were just some of the things that came out of the Global Roar. The technology's there, the excitement's there. Industry 4.0 is here. What we need to be contemplating is what our industry needs to put in place for Industry 6.0 to enable that systems of systems. So that's just
okay, thank you. So just moving on, Nick, I understand that ABB is actually a sponsor of one of Amira Global's interoperability projects. Is that correct? And in terms of your perspective as a METS company, how are miners equipping themselves to drive value in their operations? And what are you finding that the market leaders are investing in?
Yeah, so I think the answer to your first question is yes, we are actually doing a collaboration project with we are sponsoring or a partnership with the University of West Australia with the ERDI Test Lab. And I believe Amira is part of that as well in a project that we're working together on. So, and I think that was launched in September 2020. So you can see already in a short period of time that there's already some good partnerships regarding digital in the mining community that are happening. In regards to how we are working or what we see in the mining sector, well, first thing is what I'd like to say is that, as ABB, we've been around for over 130 years, and we've been in Australia for since 1906, and in 60 years in mining. And in that time, we've seen obviously a lot of change. And in the last, I think, a short period of time, we've actually seen quite a large evolution of change in the way that we digitally do things. And I think this is heavily driven around the pandemic that we are currently facing or are still in. But as the pandemic what it's done is it's basically made it so that we have to think about different ways of how we can work. And when we look at it, we look at remote connectivity. And I think Mark mentioned this as well, but we have to think about how we can look at, working remotely for safety. Now, if that's the pandemic, or if it's because we're working in a hazardous environment, because our mines are getting deeper, or whatever it might be, we're still looking at how we can work remotely. When we look at how we can minimize unplanned downtime, how can we now get people in some of the mine sites are becoming quite remote, as they probably have been in Australia for a while, but globally they're quite remote. How do we get expert people or expertise to some of these sites that are quite remote in a short period of time to minimize the downtime and the losses that are potentially affecting that customer? And when you look at technologies like augmented reality, and I think as well, Mark mentioned that everyone has an iPhone or a Samsung device now, and we hold it up and we can take a picture of what we're working on. Well, we can use augmented reality and bring that back to an expert sitting somewhere in Switzerland or Germany or Sweden or wherever it is, and provide a very high level of expert advice almost instantaneously, right? We don't have to wait for someone to get on planes, et cetera, et cetera. But to do all this, you really have to think about the culture, right? And really that new way of thinking. Digital is a different way of thinking, and traditionally a lot of the miners are thinking still, like I mentioned before, filling up a haul truck. Do you go over and you fill it up because that's what we're all used to, or do we use a robot to do it, as an example? So having that change, the ability to think from the top down and how can we implement digital technologies throughout our operations is something that I think needs to happen and is happening in the industry currently. When we look at the integration of it all, we have IT, which we all use our computers right now, and we have the OT. So heavily the operational technology and the information technology are slowly merging together. So our operations, our mine sites merging with IT. And with this, we also get into questions in cybersecurity as an example as well. And I think a lot of work is being done around cybersecurity. Mark mentioned also using cloud-based solutions as an example. And this allows us to have large amounts of computing power, right? That big data type processing, which generally in the past was reserved for limited companies with larger computers, et cetera, whereas now we can use the cloud-based computing. And last but not least, and I think this is where we need to think about where do the skills come from to allow digital change. Mining companies are generally, focused heavily on the mining side, but the digital side, you will require people that understand about cybersecurity, or you will have to understand about how do you get the connection between, a fleet management system and the cloud-based, technologies, et cetera. So the workforce is the upskilling on the workforce and the requirement for people to understand how we do connect assets to the cloud and how we do use this data as well, which is an extremely important point. Collecting it's one thing, but using it and have meaningful results is then another thing. So yeah, with all this, then if we look at to your last question was really where or who's leading the pack in theory. When we look at it, we don't have to actually look that far. In Australia here, we're actually quite advanced with our digital mining, and there's companies, for example, as Goldfields, their Granny Smith mine. They are working quite a lot with digital solutions for their fleet management, operational management systems, and are probably one of the forerunners for what we see or for what I see in the digital mining sphere. Further afield, we have miners like Boliden in Sweden, which is definitely a lighthouse, I think, for digital. And I don't think there's much there that probably isn't digitally managed. Yeah, so these are just a couple examples. And like I said, really proud to say that here in Australia, we do have some flagship projects and miners that are really leading the way.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick. So in our discussion so far, we've looked at where the sector is going in regards to digital transformation. And we've explored how the technologies such as automation and robotic are adding the value. So let's round it off by finding out where we need to focus is to embed the technologies as an integrated whole across the mining chain. These are open questions to the panel. What is keeping us from embracing the technologies now? I noticed in the discussion we've talked about an innovation mindset and culture. Is that one of our main issues? Is it silos? Is it not adopting the mobile solution? And does in fact the solution lie in the next generation of the workforce?
Well, I actually think one thing we should be careful about is being too pessimistic, I suppose, because there are some Canadian studies that I saw a year or two back, which they did some cross-sector sort of analysis, and mining actually came across very high in terms of its uptake of a lot of these new technologies. We're almost considered to be a leader across a lot of sectors. So I think sometimes in mining we tend to sort of downplay ourselves a little bit, and actually mining is doing some really good work. So I always think it's probably worth keeping in mind a bit of context there, that we may be doing a lot better than we think we sometimes are. I think right now, Angela, there's a lot of focus on the low-hanging fruit. So what I call digitization, there's a lot of manual things that happen around mines where there's this slow transfer of that into technology-based solutions. I think there's a lot of that happening, and that's been pretty good, and a lot of positive outcomes out of that. The next big step, which is a lot harder because I think it does involve a lot of change and a lot of culture and change management, is the true sort of digital transformation stuff, where you're not just digitizing stuff, you're actually completely changing the way that we do things and the way processes work and the way people are involved in those processes. That sort of work is a lot more difficult. It's only partially about the technology. The technology enables some pretty cool things, but it means fundamentally doing things quite differently. And I think that's a big challenge for any organization, not just mining companies. So I think that's a place that next step, when we start to consider where we're going to go, there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think, most companies, are still playing around the fringe of that and trying to figure out how they can sort of bring around real step change. And, if you just think about predictive technologies, for instance, and what they offer up, there is a lot of potential already out there. There's a lot of companies who've had predictive type technology, what they do for a long time. But the implementation of that in, say, a maintenance division, to completely refactor the way they do business based around how they would take decision support from predictive technologies into account, it really does change the game. It requires a lot of trust. It requires a whole reshaping of the way that you would plan and manage what you do. So there's a lot of work in that, and that's where I think there's definitely some steps to be taken yet, where there's a big investment of really applying the will to change and take up those kinds of things. But and one other thing I would add really quickly is I've recently been involved in some really good discussions with vendors and people playing in other sectors. So agriculture, we talked about Industry 4.0, so manufacturing kind of spaces who have a lot of technologies and ideas that are quite applicable to mining, but still need that bridge to be built to figure out, how does that idea over there sort of really play out in the mining space with some of the constraints or contextual bits that are sort of unique to mining. And I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities around that too. We see drones and robotics, for instance, being used in agriculture in some very interesting ways that you think, well, there's definitely scope to do that in mining too. But again, it's just sort of doing the work to translate those ideas across.
Further to that, Mark, is the test facilities, Mirabup in Perth being one of them, as well as North Canada, mining, where there is this cross-fertilization of industries focusing on the technology rather than industry driving the technology. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to refresh and reshape what we expect, particularly the younger generations coming through.
Jacqui, can I just interrupt? We are having a lot of problems hearing you. Are you actually able to sit forward and speak into the microphone a bit further?
Right. So the concept of bringing technologies together, bringing people together to work on the technologies from cross sectors. This is what we are looking at Amira in terms of or being involved in those tests so that we can accelerate some of the transfer. And I think there's a great opportunity for us to explore in terms of the youth coming through, whether our education system is actually right for the kind of people. And I put it to you that sitting an exam for 3 hours, not being able to clarify the question, nor being able to work with your peers on a solution seems a harsh way to filter the kind of people that we want to get through into the industry to work on these collaborative programs. So I think as an industry, we need to be challenging not only the SMEs, but also challenging our societal expectations of the people coming through. And I know that's a big one, but I think it's a very positive one when, as you say, Mark, they do play with technology on a daily basis.
I think it's encouraging to actually, off the back of that, Jacqui, to just say, I have some connections with the WA School of Mining and talking to some of the people there on the faculty, and it's really cool that they are starting to invest in data science skills in people coming through the courses, so that they are actually really well equipped to deal with the data that they're being exposed to and have access to. And I think that's probably a big change from the past. I mean, actually, some of these young people going through the current program at the WA School of Mines are sort of actually dabbling already with machine learning algorithms and a lot of this sort of stuff, which traditionally definitely would have been seen as someone else's domain, but now that's sort of baked into their curriculum. And I think that's a really healthy thing. There is a broader problem, I think, across the mining industry of mining not being too sexy and a lot of young people choosing to go down other career paths, which is unfortunate. And I think mining does need to figure out how it attracts and keeps a lot of young talent and gets itself through those cycles where we tend to pull people in and then ditch them, which is a terribly unhealthy way to promote and build an industry, but it's being part of our cyclical curse. So I think that's a problem, but on the whole, I think there are some nice things happening.
That idea of actually developing technologists who can span different sectors, I think is quite encouraging from a cyclical perspective, that we don't just chew and spit people out, but rather attract them through robotics and automation to apply that knowledge in our sector, rather than being focused on our sectors, break down that silo. I was quite encouraged through the global war at how many people come into mining through robotics and automation. So actually it's an opportunity to attract talent. Our challenges is an opportunity to attract and develop that talent. That can be applied elsewhere as well.
Yeah. So what I probably would like to add here is that I don't think there's a magic wand that you can wave and have digital mine instantaneously. If you think about it, some of the mines that we have can be quite old. Some of the mines here are 80, 90, 100 years old, probably even older. I'm not sure, right? But when you think about it, some of the technology that's in there or the equipment that's in there can be 20, 30, 40 years old. And these pieces of equipment, these assets, are not digital ready. They're not connectable. They are not in any form or fashion like that, right? So the question, or they can't even maybe be retrofitted to be digital ready. And so what happens is that, if you build a greenfield mine and you build it from the base up, I think the adoption is there, the thoughts are there, the wishes are there, the skills are there to go digital, a digital mine, right? It's all there because you can plan it from the beginning. But it's a completely different topic when you're having to look at a mine that might be, 20, 30, 40 years old and say, okay, I would like to go down the digital journey, would love to go down the digital journey, but how do I do it? And that's where, you know, the capital cost to upgrade things to make it digital ready could be cost prohibitive, number one. It might just not be possible at this time, or it might be a program that's going to require 5, 6, 7 years of where we say, okay, in, you know, this year we do these assets underground and we upgrade them to be digital ready, and, you know, these assets the next year. And, you know, as an example, you know, look at the haul trucks driving around that are still diesel electric, right? You know, what potential can we go to either trolley assisted or go to EV type vehicles, right? And even for underground mining specifically, EV vehicles should be totally possible. But it costs money to do that. And I think it's a journey. And I think there's not that hesitation. I think I agree with Mark, it's not all negative. There's a lot of positivity, and like I said, we've got, you know, positive results here in Australia, and, you know, a lot of miners investing in, like I said, the test lab with the University of Western Australia are keen to do this stuff, but it just won't happen, you know, overnight with a magic wand.
In the remaining minutes we've got, which is just a few minutes to go, got one final question, and perhaps you can all give me one example of what are the lessons that we've learned so far from this process.
Lessons in general, Angela?
Lessons about introducing digital systems, yes.
I think the lesson for me would be to look to the youth, how flexible and adaptive they are, and that we can all learn from, I suppose, the positivity they bring, the experience they bring, so different. And it's really rethinking how we learn what we learn and how we contribute.
Mark?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we've been learning in this space is that you can actually go a long way with quite basic sort of solutions. And, you know, to Nick's earlier point, I mean, we've got a very old fleet here in our mine. We're really for a refresh, but in the meantime, we're doing our best to protect the old fleet. And, you know, coming across solutions that are really simple IoT sensors that you glue onto, you know, you're not over baking the solution of some kind of special mount and bracket. They're literally glued onto the side of a bearing or something, and then transmitting back temperature data through simple wireless type approaches. A lot of this stuff is pretty cheap actually, and the bang for buck is huge. Yes, it's a bit rough and ready. Every so often the things fall off, but you know what? You just go to the shelf, you get another one and you glue it back on. It's not an overbaked solution. It's not trying to boil the ocean. It's just keep it really simple. You get bang for buck for a pretty low input, and you know, and you can actually travel quite a long way on, you know, what you might in the old days have called sort of chicken wire solutions, where you know, just hatching something and making it work. I think we're almost back to those days where you can do some quite cool things with the way the technology is, and I think it's actually quite exciting.
Yep, and just look from my point, you know, I think we're there from my perspective. The technology's there, the infrastructure can be there. It's not, you know, as Mark said, you can just, you know, get cheaper sensors to attach to make things digital ready. But generally speaking, you know, most things that are provided nowadays are all, you know, IoT enabled, etc. And I don't think there's anyone that probably sits around the tables or would listen to this that would say that they're not wanting to go on some form of a digital journey. So it's just a matter of actually having that cultural change and that mindset change to actually, you know, get on board and give it a go.
Well, thank you very much. They were really interesting lessons. Thank you also for the discussion today. It's been fantastic to hear from you all. I'd like to thank you for joining me, taking the time out of your day, and I would like to wish you a happy IMARC and enjoy your time, and all of those listening, enjoy your IMARC 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you.